play to save the season. The throw, fire, and down! It's a blast out at the goal line by San Diego! Tomlinson, off the left side. Tomlinson sidestep. Hello, history books. They have to now. Here's Sproles. Sproles inside the 10, inside the 5, and the Chargers win the game.
Hey, don't know what happened to the video. I think it froze, but we're here. You guys know how it goes. Who cares? Thanks for joining us, guys. First of 3 shows this week. Today, we're going over training camp battles on the offensive side of the ball. Later this week, what are we doing? Wednesday, Thursday? I already forgot. The 17th or the 19th. Wednesday.
19th. That will be Wednesday.
Wednesday, we're doing defensive camp battles. We'll go over special teams, and then on Saturday we're doing a 53-man roster prediction. All 3 of us are going to give our 53s. Way too early before training camp starts next Monday, but we're here, and we got a big announcement coming very, very soon. But as Jamie teased, and I did as well, and Craig did, the Lightning Round podcast will be going 5 shows a week as soon as the season starts, maybe a little bit before that. But we're bringing you all the Lightning Round podcast. We're going to break off into our own shows. Announcement coming soon on the details of that. But just get ready because we're all doing a lot more shows.
Yep, you'll get 2 shows a week with all of us. Each of us will have our own show. Big things coming, so stay tuned.
Yes. So stay tuned for that. That's coming soon. But today is training camp battle. So we're going to go over offense. We'll just go through each position group. We'll talk about the training camp battles. We'll talk about who might be on the roster bubble, maybe some surprise cuts. But we're just going to go over every single person going into camp. And we're going to start with, of course, quarterback here. And right now, going into camp, it's 3. It is Justin Herbert, Easton Stick, and Max Duggan. Jamie, I know you want first crack at talking about Max Duggan, so I'm going to throw this to you. Let's talk about this quarterback group.
I really don't, but I will.
Okay, Greg. Jamie's done.
Far be it from me.
So, I mean, we all know going into this with the new 3 quarterback rule, we know the team's going to carry
that thing. Up until like a couple hours ago, I forgot all about that. So please let everybody else know, just in case they forgot, just like me. I don't know that you guys knew. I think I reminded you too, but go ahead.
So the NFL passed a new rule saying that teams could carry 3 quarterbacks. The 3rd quarterback has to be on the 53-man roster on Sunday, and he can only come into the game if the other 2 quarterbacks go down to injury.
Right. They won't. The 3rd quarterback won't count against your active roster on game day.
Right. He'd be correct. So they were going to keep 3 quarterbacks anyway, because they always do, and they're dumb like that, as we've covered many, many times. But now it just makes it easier for them to do that and justify it. Great. Awesome. Thank you, NFL. So now it's a matter of who's going to be QB2 and who's going to be QB3. If you listen to the draft show when we did it, both during the draft when they took Duggan, I'm sure Garrett talked about it, and afterwards when we covered everybody, we talked about how the team thinks that Duggan can come in and compete for QB2 with Easton Stick right away. We also know from a lot of information we got last year that Stick is a guy who they value in that QB3 spot, and he really hasn't done anything to ascend much past the QB3 spot. I think the thing that I struggle with, that I've struggled with for a long time, is neither one of these guys does anything that Justin Herbert can't do. Neither one of them is particularly good at anything outside of maybe extending plays with his legs and being athletic. Neither is particularly accurate. Neither has a particularly strong arm. Neither one of them has what you would really call an NFL body. They're both 6'1"-ish, kind of on the small side. not really capable of throwing great deep balls. They both underthrow the ball quite a bit. The ball placement's a little sketchy. Yeah, they can run the ball. Maybe you can introduce like a goal line, red zone package for one of them at times. I wouldn't do that, but maybe you can. I could easily see Duggan beating Stick out for QB2 just because they drafted him this year. He's got 4 years left with the team, and they obviously like his leadership, and they think that they can turn him into a quarterback. And I think they've probably seen what they need to see from Stick. They like him in that QB3 role. This just makes it easier to keep him in that role moving forward.
Yeah. They only signed Stick to a 1-year deal, and it was just under $2 million. So obviously there's not a big tie there, but it's not like they're going to cut him. I mean, Stick and Duggan and obviously Justin Herbert are all going to stay on the roster unless there's some kind of disaster in camp, whether they're terrible or an injury happens to one of these backups. All three of these guys are going to make the roster because you got to keep 3 on the 53. You can't keep 2. So, and you can't promote a quarterback on game day either. So they've got to be on the active roster. They got to be there on game day. These 3 will count towards your 53, which is going to be interesting when we start to break down the 53, because now we can't take where we skim from other position groups. Sometimes we'd skim from the quarterback and only take 2 because we would only take 2 and then add another player somewhere else, but they're going to have to keep 3 and then fill out the other 50 from other positions. So yeah, I mean, it's right now it's who's going to be QB2, who's going to be QB3. It's going to be competition between Easton Stick, Max Duggan, like Jamie. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to think that Duggan can compete with Stick. You don't really see a lot from Stick other than, when he uses his legs, which I would want Justin Herbert to do on game day anyway. So I wouldn't want to see any of those packages, but in terms of depth chart, these are your 3. We'll see who gets 2 and QB3 going into camp, but it doesn't really matter because Justin Herbert's QB1.
Yeah, the 2-3 battle, at the end of the day, who really cares, I guess. But honestly speaking, I think the really interesting thing about this is just the types of QBs that we have on the roster. And it makes me wonder how much more they're going to open up the running game with regard to utilizing the quarterbacks as well, because we both know, or I'm sorry, all 3 of us know that the other 2 guys, Stick and Duggan, can move. So makes me wonder a little bit with regard to how they're planning on utilizing maybe even some packages. I mean, I would rather not have to take Herbert out at all for either one of these guys, but in the event something like that does happen, you have 2 mobile quarterbacks. So I am curious to see how they plan on deploying the QBs this year, if Herbert's going to get some more literal run, and also if either of the other 2 guys get in, how much running they're going to do. It's going to make for an ugly preseason, but at least there's going to be some level of competition there, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to answer, and just to comment on RGS's comment here, saying they're going to keep 2 quarterbacks this season, save the comment, they absolutely cannot. And Craig said it in the chat or in a text, thank the 49ers for that. You absolutely have to have 3 quarterbacks. You can't have 2. So there, it's not possible. Go ahead, Jimmy.
I would just add to what Craig was saying, when they hired Kellen Moore and we did our preview show of Kellen Moore, one of the things that stood out to me is how much he will use the quarterback's legs as a part of the offense, particularly in the red zone. It was a pretty big wrinkle, somewhere between a wrinkle and a focal point in terms of using the quarterback's legs, designing packages to get the quarterback out on the edge and give him a chance to get, kind of free runs at the goal line. So, having 3 mobile quarterbacks gives you some options. Like we've all already said, nobody needs to see that with Stick and Duggan in a regular season game, mostly because you're kind of tipping your hand if you've got them in there in a red zone package and you're taking the ball out of Herbert's hands, which who the hell wants to do that? So
they're certainly not in there to throw the ball. You know that?
No, absolutely not. although I think their arms are just strong enough to throw the ball about 15 or 20 yards. That's about the max. So, but yeah, no, I think we will see more quarterbacks on the run in the red zone in particular, maybe on some 3rd and short situations. But let's do that with Herbert, not with the other 2. And let's move on to the next position because I'm already tired of talking about 3 quarterbacks.
Really quickly though, just to throw this in there, I went back and watched that 2020 Rose Bowl again, and man, they're doing Herbert a disservice with not getting him out on the run. It could be such a huge part of his game. I know we don't want to risk injury there, but to be able to threaten the defense with a guy that can move like that, and by him having that bigger frame, guys aren't going to want to come up and lay a hit on him the way that they would one of the smaller guys. So hopefully they do incorporate it into the offense a bit.
Yeah, definitely. Which maybe the injury last year played a part, but yes, I'm sure they'll get him on the move more this season. So, Craig, let's move on to running backs. Obviously, there's a fullback in here too, but the list goes: Austin Eckler, Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, Xander Horvath, Larry Roundtree, and the UDFA's Elijah Dotson and Tyler Hoosman.
Yeah, so we kind of know how this goes as far as 1 and 2 are concerned, Eckler and Kelly. I do, though, feel that personally, and maybe this is just a bias thing because I do like Isaiah Spiller, there's a potential for him to eat into some of Kelly's carries as the season goes on if he's given a chance to basically show what he can do and if he can stand out. If any of those pass protection issues have been solved, which, I mean, I'm not sure that I saw a lot of, even though he wasn't on the field a bunch. But if that was one of the reasons for keeping him off, then, another season under his belt, another off season of preparing and, going into camp, maybe he can prove himself there as well. Behind that is where it gets a little interesting because you're looking at guys that are going to be participating on special teams, and the team really seems to like Larry Roundtree. For what reason, I don't know. But hey, if he can provide something there, great. But then Xander Horvath, and I know Horvath is a fullback technically, but looking at him as another one of those bigger backs that could potentially be used in short yardage situations. So he may not, I mean, you could still, of course, line him up in the fullback position to hand the ball off to him that way. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him being utilized in a few different ways just to kind of get the most wear out of him in the offense and on special teams. I think he would probably be a little bit more beneficial even than Larry Roundtree would. But as far as the rest of the guys go, Elijah Brown and Tyler Usman, actually like Elijah Dotson. Did I call him Elijah Brown?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, sorry. But Dotson is what I meant. I don't see him making the roster at all. I mean, he could end up being a practice squad guy, something like that. But as far as what we're looking at going into camp, he's someone that I'm really going to keep a really close eye on, someone who could potentially make some noise. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the really key guys there are going to be kind of in that 3-5 range. So in between Spiller and Roundtree is, I think, the guys that everyone kind of needs to really, really key in on. And ultimately, for me, it's all about what can Spiller do this offseason to kind of gain some ground. And then going into the season, if he can further establish himself and make it a little tougher on Joshua Kelly back there for that number 2 role. The team really likes Kelly, of course. I find him to be more of a niche back, probably better as a power guy. I don't think he excels all that much in a zone scheme just from lack of patience and doesn't have the best vision. But the Chargers love him, so we'll see how it goes from here on out.
Yeah, I think Spiller is kind of the key to this group, to be honest with you. Eckler is entering the last year of his contract. Seems like, whether it's intentional or not, it kind of seems like he's blowing up the relationship on his way out the door. Kelly is fine. I know he looked explosive at times last year, looked really good in the preseason, had some nice runs last year. But I feel like Spiller is the guy that was drafted to be the bell cow moving forward. And they obviously felt like they had the depth that they could take an extra year to develop him. And Spiller is a guy who I think has a lot of value right now in short yardage situations, in third down situations, if they need to give Eckler a break, just because he is such a good receiver. And I think you could start to see his role develop in the red zone too. They're going to need to develop more of a rotation in the red zone, I think, be a little bit more balanced there. And I think Spiller's a guy who could not only eat into some of Kelly's reps, but if the plan is to move on from Eckler, then I could see Spiller, assuming he's, pleasing the coaches and they like what they see, I could see him start to eat into some of those reps in the red zone for Eckler too, because they're going to need to develop the guys behind Eckler if they're not going to bring him back. And right now, it certainly seems like he's not coming back, whether he doesn't want to or whether they're ready to move on or whatever the case may be. It just seems like the writing's on the wall for him to go in a different direction. And this is really one of the few years where you look at the running back room and you think, wow, there's really no space for a UDFA to make the team. There's almost always a spot for a UDFA running back on this roster. It's just how they fill out the depth, and more often than not. And it doesn't seem like that's going to happen this year. You know, you've got Spiller as the likely RB3. They seem to see some value in Roundtree somewhere, whether it's on special teams or whatever the case may be. I still have yet to see it, but he's entering year 3, so who knows what that's going to look like. Horvath has some versatility. Like Craig mentioned, he can be a short yardage guy. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He offers something as a blocker. He offers some special teams value. So it's really going to come down to, can Spiller establish himself on special teams? Can he establish himself in short yardage situations? And is there going to be an opportunity for him to eat into some of those red zone touches so that they don't have to rely so heavily on Eckler in the red zone? Because I think they would benefit from being a little bit more well-rounded and a little bit less predictable in those situations. And as far as Dotson and Husman, you know, one of those guys may be on the practice squad, but I think that's about the extent of it in terms of UDFA running back. I don't think there is the depth, there is the room or the availability for one of those guys to make the roster, even with as common as it has been for the Chargers in years past. I just don't see it happening this year.
Do you think Larry Roundtree's a lock to make this roster? Is that why?
I think Larry Roundtree is probably at the very least a lock to make the practice squad. They drafted him, 2 years ago? So they have more capital and time invested in him than they do in guys like Dotson and Husman. So he's already got an inside track, I think, on at least a practice squad spot. Do I think he makes the roster? No, I don't. I don't think they carry 4 running backs. I don't think they need to, particularly if they're carrying Horvath as the fullback. But Roundtree gives them some, quote unquote experience, depth, and possibly some special teams value, whether it's as a personal protector or whatever the case might be, in terms of depth. And that's always a good thing to have. And we know they've been trying to rebuild special teams. So you would think that would give him a leg up.
Yeah. You guys touched on a lot of it. I mean, Austin Eckler, obviously, however unhappy he is about his financial situation, he's going to be at camp and he's going to have that motivation to kind of earn that money he thinks he deserves by showing out this season. So he's going to be RB1. And then Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, there's obviously going to be a competition there. And I think Spiller's going to get a ton of opportunities in camp to earn a role this season. I know some thought he was kind of in the doghouse last season because he didn't really get any reps and they didn't really push him, but it felt like there was enough depth there that they didn't really need to put him on the field too early. So if they didn't think he was ready last year, they're definitely going to give him a ton of opportunities, because if Austin Eckler only has one more year and is as unhappy as he is, and Joshua Kelly has proven that he's not a RB1, he's probably more an RB3 in most systems. You got to think that, they got to give Spiller an opportunity to kind of prove, with the draft capital they spent on him, is he going to be a bell cow? Can he be a starting running back like he was in college? Can he take on that workload? Is he ready? Do they need to move on from him and Eckler and move on to a new running back? They got to figure all that out going into camp and then heading into the season. So Spiller is going to get a ton of reps and a lot of looks in camp. Larry Roundtree is definitely on the bubble. I think he's on the outside looking in too. If you've got Eckler, Kelly, Spiller, and then Xander Horvath as your fullback, I think everybody after that is probably not making this team, at least the initial 53. Roundtree has had his usage and his snap counts decrease in the last 2 seasons. He's going on his 3rd. I think we've seen enough of Roundtree. I don't know that and I realize I just misspelled his name here on this card, but there's no D, but we can. It
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because he won't be on the 53.
Nobody would have noticed it if you hadn't pointed it out. So.
I certainly didn't see it.
Listen, I'm owning my mistakes. I'm not going to go on Twitter and complain about it. But yeah, I own my mistakes. I put a D there. My bad. But yeah, so I I don't see Larry Roundtree making this team unless he absolutely shows out. And even then, I don't know how you could keep him. But I'm with Craig. I'm a big fan of Elijah Dotson. He was my number 4 UDFA when we went over our top 5. The kid out of Northern Colorado. He was a running back and a returner. He's kind of a shorty, shiftier running back with good vision. I think he's 5'9", like 200 pounds. Pretty good in the open field. Showed some really good hands. He's a playmaker, but he lacks size and athleticism. He could really like pitch it in a multitude of ways. I think he could probably compete with Larry Roundtree as that RB4 in camp, but really I think he's more of a practice squad candidate than anything else. While watching Hoosman, I mean, he's just kind of a one cut and go type runner. He just relies on that kind of a decisive run style because he's not all that athletic. He was pretty productive at the goal line, but I think you've got other players here that you want to put over Hoosman, obviously. A kid that would cash in a lot at the goal line by jumping over the pile. But, I think with Horvath, who's 3 inches taller and like 15 pounds heavier, you probably want to give him more of that role than a guy like Hoosman. But probably his best shot at practice squad. I don't know that they would keep him. I think it's probably more likely that they keep a Roundtree since they drafted him, maybe an Elijah Dotson, but definitely not 3. And I think it goes Roundtree, Dotson, and then Hoosman of this list. So
yeah, and just real quick, just to kind of wrap that conversation up, they drafted Kelly and Roundtree in consecutive years, and then they drafted Spiller the next year. Mm-hmm. So they're looking ahead towards life without Eckler. Spiller, in my opinion, is a better power back than Kelly. He's a more natural receiver than Kelly. I thought he was a pretty good blocker in college. They used him in pass protection. They used him as a lead blocker, as a fullback on occasion. He did some of those things pretty well. Kelly probably has better burst, but I think Spiller has better vision and is a little shiftier in the open field. So I think there are things there that Spiller does that Kelly just can't do or doesn't do as well. And that's why I think over time in camp and during the season, I think we're going to see Spiller be that RB3 and kind of build towards being RB2 and maybe even more of a kind of a two-headed monster with Eckler with kind of the power and speed combo.
And just to tie it off, thinking about it a little bit more, I think Horvath kind of makes Roundtree expendable, because if you're thinking about it from a special team standpoint, I don't think there's anything Roundtree can do that Horvath can't. And then as far as athletically, I think Horvath tested far better than Roundtree did overall. I have to go back and look at the RAS scores, but I'm fairly certain that Horvath is the better athlete. And then when you take a guy like Dotson in consideration also, he's more of Eckler than anyone else is. So when you're talking about if they have a type of running back that they're looking to keep on the roster, knowing that this is, in fact, Eckler's last year, if they can stash Dotson on the practice squad, maybe that's a developmental guy that they can have in the mix going into, if you're looking longer term, into 24. So there are a couple of guys on here that could make sense going down the line, but also I think also Roundtree is probably he's no sure thing to make the roster. As a matter of fact, he could probably land himself in my cuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's on the outside looking in and heading into camp. All right, and we're going to get into 53s this weekend. So
you think he's outside looking in terms of roster and practice squad, or just roster?
No, just 53.
Got it.
Yeah. All right, so next up here, moving on to tight ends. We've got 6 here: Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, Trey McKitty, Stone Smart, Hunter Kampmoyer, and Michael Azika. We know Gerald Everett's a starter. Donald Parham was brought back on a 2-year deal this offseason. They gave him a ripcord after this season, so he could be cut next offseason. But for 2023, Chicken Parm is back. He'll be part of the starting tight end rotation, assuming he stays healthy, which at this point is his biggest deterrent. Trey McKitty's clock is kind of ticking in my mind. He's been given snaps with injuries the last 2 seasons, shown some real inconsistent hands, struggled as a blocker, which is a role they gave him in offense. I know they spent a day to pick on him. He's got 2 years to show something, but I think it's more likely that, not that he's on the hot seat, but I think for McKitty, it's getting, in my mind, it's getting a little warm. I think next offseason is going to be next training camp is going to when it's going to warm up a little bit more, get a little bit hotter. I think it's just getting warm here because he hasn't. You're not going to give up on a tight end you draft in the third round in the third year. I'm not saying he's a camp casualty in my mind, but I do think that he's got to start making some noise pretty soon. We're also going to have to start going in other directions. Stone Smart is a guy that he was a former wide receiver, former quarterback at Old Dominion. The Chargers were hyping him up all last training camp. We were hearing his name a lot. Then he got injured. The Old Dominion product is probably going to be competing for that tight end 3 role with McKitty. Going to be fighting with Parham maybe even for tight end 2 snaps is his best case scenario. If Parham can't stay healthy, he's a pretty good athlete, relatively new to the position, but sounds like he did pretty good last offseason in training camp, and it was his first year as playing the tight end position. So I'm sure they're expecting pretty big things this coming training camp. Hunter Kampmoyer, which kind of just a camp body who got work because of all the injuries to the position last season. Kind of a special teams guy. He's in the mix to compete, but not a guy I expect to make the roster. Maybe practice squad stash there for Kampmoyer. And then Michael Azika is pretty interesting. He didn't make my top 5, but I did like him. A former wide receiver, another guy who converted to tight end as a blocker. He improved every season at UCLA. The hands are pretty good. Route running is about above average. Pretty physical after the catch. Throughout his time at UCLA, he just packed on 30 pounds of muscle. So the frame's kind of still growing, still filling out. And the Chargers need tight end depth. I'm not saying he's going to make the roster, but I think this is a pretty interesting camp battle going on after Trey McKitty between Smart, Kampmoyer, and Azika. Probably another guy who's in the running for a practice squad spot for the UDFA Azika.
Yeah, I think, looking at this, the 2 guys that I'm most comfortable with in some sort of role on the offense are Everett and Parham. And Parham, I think, he established himself as a pretty important part of the running game as a blocker when he came back from his injury last year. And that's, I think, going to be very important for them moving into this year with Moore running the offense, with running the new offense. So I think Parham is a guy who he's not living up to expectations. I think most Charger fans look at him and see this monster who's going to be this huge red zone weapon, and he's going to make all these catches and posterize people, and they're going to throw him jump balls, and it's going to be awesome. And it just hasn't materialized. He's a good athlete. He does well with the ball in his hands. They do a good job at times of scheming him open, although he doesn't really seem to get open on his own all that much. And he's a valuable blocker. So he and Everett, in my mind, are pretty safe because they have pretty clearly defined roles and they have clearly defined skill sets. I think when you look at McKitty, like Garrett said, he just isn't very good. He's entering year 3.
I didn't say that.
You did. You may not have said it directly, but you did.
I insinuated it.
What does Trey McKitty do? He was supposed to be a great blocker.
Mm-hmm.
That has not played out through his first 2 years. Mm-hmm. He was a better blocker year 1 than he was in year 2. He was kind of a mess as a blocker in year 2. And
he went backwards.
A lot of the issues they had in the running game were directly attributed to him missing blocks, tripping over his own feet, just not getting to his spot. He was bad. He looked lost a lot of the time. So I feel like there's opportunity there. Granted, he was a 3rd round pick. He's a guy who they are, for whatever reason, they seem to be excited about, and they seem to be trying to force opportunities for him in certain situations. But I feel like there's opportunity for somebody to step up. And Smart is the guy on this list that I think you look at and think maybe there's some upside there. He's an athlete. He was making big plays in training camp last year before he got hurt. Can he block? If he can block even reasonably well, then I think there's a really strong argument for keeping him either as tight end 4 or just dropping McKitty and going to tight end 3. I would not be surprised personally. It's paining me even as I think it and get ready to say it. I could totally see them keeping 4 tight ends this year. We'll get into it when we do the 53, but I don't think they're going to be comfortable cutting a Parham or a McKitty or a Smart. So I could easily see them talking themselves into keeping keeping 4 tight ends. And if that's the case, then Smart's a guy that I would keep an eye on because it probably means they've got plans for him. And right now, it's hard to see much in the way of plans for McKitty. Camp Moyer's a guy who I thought might make the team last year just because of the special teams value. Not so sure about that right now. And, you're probably looking at Camp Moyer and Ezekiel competing for a practice squad spot at the end of the day. That's my guess.
Yeah. As far as this list is concerned, same. We all know 1 and 2 have to be there, or else this team is in real trouble when we're talking about the tight end position. So Everett, of course, having improved practically every year as a pro, had his best year in the NFL last season, and I fully expect for him to flourish in this new offense as well. And I also see him as more of a move tight end. He's going to line up, probably play a little H, maybe line up at fullback from time to time, get him moving around in the backfield, out in the routes that way. Parham did prove himself to be a pretty serviceable blocker, which is saying a lot for a guy that's 6'8". I mean, it's not the easiest thing being the low man, because that almost never happens, but finding a way to utilize his leverage and, keep guys honest on the edge, move them off the ball a little bit. And I still see him as a bit of a seam stretcher. He can run. For someone his size, he moves fairly well. He's not the most agile guy, but there are instances of him making people miss in the open field, surprisingly. Just as far as just stretching the seam as a true Y, lining up at the end of the line and getting down the middle of the field, he has an advantage just from a size perspective. So he doesn't necessarily have to outrun people per se, but he can stress a defense because, there aren't very many 6'6+ safeties and linebackers to match up with him. So you can absolutely take advantage of that. As far as McKitty is concerned, whatever. He did, though, attend Tight End U, which is a tight end camp run in the offseason. I think it got started by George Kittle and Travis Kelce. Mm-hmm. So maybe he learned something there. Maybe a little bit of whatever they have rubs off on him. He's able to take advantage of it this season. I was a person a couple of years ago that saw the vision with McKitty a little bit, just because I paid a little bit more attention to what he did in his days in Georgia. He was more of a receiver there.
Craig was the one.
Yeah, I know he was the lone person.
I was the only one. Now, McKitty. I'm not going to say don't bash me here. I didn't love it, but I understood it, because in that particular draft they needed a bigger tight end, and he was kind of sort of the last guy that made sense from a receiving/blocking standpoint at that point. So yeah, they reached, but again, after going back and looking at what he did in Georgia when he was utilized more in in Florida State, he was utilized more in the passing game. When he transferred over to Georgia, more of a blocker because of the way that they run their offense. So I thought maybe they were thinking they could revive a little bit of that and utilize that in addition to his blocking chops. And neither has materialized, because as of last season, he can't catch and he can't block. So what the hell? Stone Smart, definitely an athletic guy, can get into the mix. We heard his name last season, and then during the offseason, and suddenly you saw him on a little bit of a cart wheeling himself around, and that didn't materialize the way that we wanted it to, or maybe they wanted to, should I say. He got in a few games last season, and I think, like Jamie said, there's probably a good chance that they'll keep 4 tight ends, because at the end of the day, it's almost like a safety net. In the event that Trey wets the bed, you might be able to slide Stone in there. And if he can block even a little bit, then that's a win. But as far as Camp Moyer goes, believe he's more of a blocker. Don't see much happening there. And Ezekiel, there's some upside there. Also a really good size tight end, newer to the position, put on some weight in the last few years, and he's another one of those developmental guys. And you can see there's kind of a trend when it comes to these skill position players, because for whoever your starters are or your primary guys, the developmental guys have some of the same traits. So again, team could be looking longer term. I think this is Everett's last year under contract. Stone Smart could potentially be your next Gerald Everett if he continues to develop, and Ezekiel could be a Parham-ish type player as well. So, but as far as the tight end room is concerned, let's just keep our fingers crossed that Everett and Parham can stay on the field, because after that, things get really ugly in a hurry.
I got a constant loop in my head of that dropped ball that McKitty had running like down the sideline that just he was wide open. It hit him in the hands. I think Herbert got smashed on that play. I can't stop thinking about that same play over and over and over when we mentioned Trey McKitty.
Should have hit him in the tummy.
I should have hit him in the tummy. That's exactly right. He might have been able to catch it. Totally. And just one more thing about this tight ends, man. There's something about the way in which Kellen Moore utilized Dalton Schultz in the red zone, where he basically had Schultz box out the defenders when you have a guy like Donald Parham, where you have, a center playing tight end where you can just box out and get him some easy touches in the red zone. I don't know. I'm excited to see this group under Kellen Moore for sure. All right, let's move on. Wide receivers, it's a big one. We got 11 names here. It is Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, the rookies Quentin Johnston and Darius Davis, Joshua Palmer, Jalen Guyton, Keelan Doss, John Hightower, Darius Shepard, and the UDFA's Pokey Wilson and Terrell Bynum. Jamie, let's talk wide receivers.
So unless something drastic changes in terms of how they construct their wide receiver room, they pretty much always go with 5 wide receivers. I can't remember a time where they broke camp with 6 wide receivers, no matter how many times we've shouted about it over the last, 10 years now. Having said that, they have gone through a lot of injuries at wide receiver the last 2 years. Last year in particular, they were down to the bottom of the barrel for most of last year. So if ever there was a year where you
Michael
would think
Bandy.
What's that?
His name is Michael Bandy. Just say his name.
Yeah. Don't remind me about that. Jet sweep. Yeah. If ever they should have motivation to carry an extra wide receiver, last year should be that motivation. Will they do it? Will they change their process? Who knows? They haven't been terribly quick in doing that in the last however many years. So who knows if they'll do that. But having said that, you can pretty much bank on them carrying 4 or 5 wide receivers. And you know that the 2 guys they just drafted are going to make the team, because obviously Johnston was a first-round pick. He's going to be productive this year. There's talk of him already having won the wide receiver 3 role, which doesn't surprise me considering where they drafted him and what they needed going into the season. And you've got Darius Davis as the primary kick and punt returner and likely gadget player in the offense. That leaves probably one spot on the 53. And I think we all know who that's going to be. I think Jalen Guyton's days are numbered. I have a hard time seeing him make this roster unless they change their philosophy on carrying 5 wide receivers. The other guys, all these guys are kind of similar. None of them are terribly explosive, not a whole lot of deep speed. Hightower is probably the one guy who has the deep speed compared to the rest. Doss, kind of a big body possession wide receiver. Shepard, potential backup return man, probably a good stash on the practice squad. Wilson, I know you guys liked Wilson a lot when we were doing our UDFA watch. Another, kind of medium-sized wide receiver, doesn't have great speed, but has good hands, makes plays down the field. And Bynum was a guy who wasn't terribly productive in college. So, I think you're probably looking at them keeping 5 wide receivers and then probably keeping 2 to 3 of these guys on the practice squad. And we can talk about who we think will make it down the line. But I think, Johnston's a guy who I'm sure they're going to use down the field. He's also going to be another, intermediate possession type receiver in the middle of the field. Davis, probably that gadget guy they've been missing for a long time on top of returning kicks and punts. And Palmer, another possession guy. He had a pretty solid year, played well at times last year. I think probably outproduced what a lot of people expected from him in some ways. And I think you see Guyton, a guy who people were excited about them bringing back. It's real easy to see him getting squeezed off this roster just based on all of the wide receivers they added, both through the draft and through UDFA in the offseason. I think his days are numbered. He's the guy who, Yeah, he's got great straight line speed down the field. The hands aren't that great. He isn't that great of a route runner. He offers nothing on special teams. And if you're going to be wide receiver 4 through 6, you kind of got to offer something on special teams. So that's kind of how I see this group breaking down, moving through camp.
Craig?
Yeah. Jamie pretty much nailed it. I mean, we know what the deal is with the top guys. Quentin Johnston basically came out and said that he's going to be a starter at wide receiver. So, I mean, in the offense that utilizes a ton of 3 wides, that is a starting position, wide receiver 3. And apparently he thinks he's won it from whatever indications he got in rookie minicamp. But Joshua Palmer is a guy that I feel like is getting a little, or is not getting enough respect just from what he was tasked with last season. I mean, dude did have a couple of 100-yard games and had a career year, albeit because he was forced into the number 1 role on a few occasions. And I think he probably comes into camp with a chip on his shoulder. Apparently he was dealing with some sort of injury, but I mean, if we believe what Staley says, then he'll be good to go when they roll in the next week or so. So the name here is Jalen Guyton, because being injured, and technically you shouldn't have to lose your position to injury, but when you're already kind of sort of one of those bubble guys like a wide receiver 4, there's not much margin for error, and that is inclusive of injuries. It's really unfortunate that he had happened what he had happened, but he also had a place on the roster because he was literally the only speed threat that they had. But now you do have Quentin Johnston, who's a faster, bigger guy. I mean, he's still not, he's not a blazer per se, but he is pretty nimble for his size. And we do know that Darius Davis is going to be available for your gadget plays and maybe take some shots down the field with him. A name there that I'm curious to see what happens with him during camp is going to be John Hightower. He's got that Boise State connection with his new offensive coordinator. I'm not sure if that matters for anything at all, but as far as being another down the field speed threat, he could potentially take a Jalen Guyton position on the roster, or at least give him some level of competition there. And who knows if Guyton's going to be the same guy after the knee injury as well. So with the remaining names there, Pokey Wilson is someone, yes, that I am pretty high on as far as a developmental guy. Really crafty route runner, not overly explosive, but makes good plays, big plays. He did that a bunch at Florida State. Also an older guy, but he's got a little bit to his game, a little bit of twitch there. But on the whole, as far as this group is concerned, probably ends up being the 5 guys, and then just really curious about what happens with Guyton, because I'm not totally sure. He seems to be more of a Herbert guy. Maybe that matters. But I think he's the one to keep an eye on here. So hopefully he can come back and perform well during camp and maybe help to solidify himself. Otherwise, you got to be on the lookout for what may happen with him.
Yeah, Guyton comes in as wide receiver 6. And like Jamie mentioned, they always keep 5. And we know Darius Davis, not only because he was drafted, but he's basically taken over what DeAndre Carter did last year as the last wide receiver in this depth chart as wide receiver 5, to be the, some depth at wide receiver, and then also the kick and punt returner like Carter was last year. So Guyton would have to, I don't want to say, move worlds, but he would have to definitely make a very, very strong case to be kept as a 6th wide receiver. It just feels like the Chargers could maybe make a case that they've got 2 rookies in this group, and maybe they want to add some veteran depth and keep a guy like Guyton. But I don't see why it makes a lot of sense. Davis is the true speed guy. It feels like Guyton is a little redundant with the weapons they have above him. So, and again, Chargers have to keep 3 wide receivers, or 3 quarterbacks. So, this is probably one of those spots where you just can't take a 6 wide receiver. Keenan and Mike Will are the 1-2. Quentin's going to be wide receiver 3. Joshua Palmer, now some depth. I agree with Craig, though. I think Palmer definitely exceeded expectations. Obviously, they needed to get better at wide receiver, especially with an eye towards the future with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams' future up in the air past the season. So drafted Quentin Johnston made a lot of sense. And now he's wide receiver 3. Joshua Palmer gets pushed back to wide receiver 4. And then Darius Davis. With the other guys, Keelan Doss, John Hightower, Darius Shepard, and I think maybe even Pokey Wilson, you're looking at maybe 2 or 3 guys making the practice squad. It seems like everybody's got a little bit of traits, but not enough to make an impact on an NFL team, but maybe enough to develop and hope that you can improve on. You guys mentioned Doss and Hightower, Shepard as returner. Pokey was a guy. I mean, he was my 5th of my top 5. He had like 6 different OCs in 6 seasons. Not a guy that really ran by anybody. Was kind of productive his last 2 years. Kind of a guy that could compete for a spot at the bottom of the depth chart for a practice squad spot. Definitely not making the 53. And then Bynum, while watching him, I don't see him being real close. I think he's a tier or 2 below everybody else here. Kind of more of a jump ball receiver because he can't separate. Obviously his best case scenario is practice squad, but I think with all the names in Doss, Hightower, Shepard, and Wilson, probably have a stronger chance of making it. But, I think this group's pretty much set. And then you kind of just look and, see what Guyton does in camp. I'm not sure he's going to do enough to make any noise to make the roster. But after that, you got some guys that are going to definitely be competing for a practice squad spot.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap up the point on Guyton, last year, if they had more quality wide receiver depth last year, I think Guyton would have been really close to being on the bubble, if not being gone.
It feels like Guyton's always the last wide receiver in.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah,
he is. And last year Palmer leapfrogged Guyton for wide receiver 3 before camp even started.
Yeah,
they were forcing Guyton as a gunner on special teams last year, just trying to see if they could find a way to keep him on the roster. So last year they went through that song and dance. He wound up making the team, I think mostly because they just didn't have any depth. This year they have a heck of a lot more depth, and they have some guys behind him that they can develop. So it's a lot easier to see him being gone this year with the 2 draft picks, plus Palmer having a 70 catch season last year. And I think, like Craig mentioned, stepping up and filling that wide receiver 1 role at times last year. He was a huge factor in a couple of their wins towards the end of the season. Had a huge game against the Falcons, making some big catches to help them take the lead towards the end of the game. So that's some real quality depth going into his 3rd year. And he can play in the slot. He can play outside. Guyton's just kind of that, one trick, one speed pony. That's really all he offers. And I think they're getting diverse enough in the wide receiver room, which is something we haven't been able to say for a long time, that they don't need to overvalue that the way they have in years past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's move on. We're gonna separate offensive line in 2 different groups. Let's talk about tackles. Obviously, there's probably some names that could shift over and play tackle in a pinch or guard in a pinch, but let's just talk about the guys on the roster listed as tackle. And those names are Rashawn Slater, Trey Pipkins, Foster Sorrell, Zach Bailey, Andrew Traynor, and the UDFA Nick Millsap. Craig?
Oh, wait. The more I look at this list from a tackle perspective, it gets really terrifying. In the event that anything were to happen to Slater or Pipkins. And again, to this day, I still cannot believe that I'm saying this about Trey Pipkins, but he is a decent right tackle. He's developed into that. We know what Rashawn Slater is coming back off of his injury last season, so fully expect him to return to form. Foster Sorrell scares me crapless. Zach Bailey is just,
There.
yeah, and you can say the same about Traynor and Millsap. Ultimately, what this boils down to is keeping those top 2 guys healthy because, yes, could you probably compensate for one going down? Absolutely. You have some guys that I'm sure we'll talk about here in a bit that in a pinch could kick out to help out in those spots. We would rather just see everyone remain whole and what this offensive line could look like at full strength, mostly for an entire season. But just from a tackle's perspective, we all love what Rashawn Slater can do in both the run and the passing game. Trey Pipkins is shown to be solid as a run blocker, probably better than a pass blocker. We'll see how he's developed this offseason and if he can remain healthy. And Sorrell's just, he's not Storm Norton, so that's a thing. But still, with that being said, nothing overly impressive. I mean, he has some traits. So, if just again is a developmental guy, if he has to come in for a few snaps or a game, still trusting in the fact that we have a new offensive coordinator that has the ability to make adjustments in the event that things don't work out perfectly up front. But as far as the tackles are going, 1 and 2 are what it's all about. And ultimately, the passing game, particularly when it comes to deep balls, which I'm sure is going to be incorporated more into the offense this season, is going to come down to those guys being able to hold up on the edges. And as things are currently constructed, I feel pretty decent about that. Again, we're going to talk about who makes the roster when we get to our 53. But, I mean, your locks are going to be, your top 3 guys, of course. And, Zach Bailey just sitting there staring me in my face. Just, But, yeah, that's how I feel about our tackles.
See, I got to say, all right, so obviously Slater and Pipkins are the starters. But I got to say, I think you're disrespecting Foster Sorrell a little bit. Now, do I want him starting at tackle? Absolutely not. But I think when he had to play, because Pipkins went down so often last year, he was not an absolute liability. He was just a steady swing tackle, and I thought that was just okay. He exceeded my expectations because I thought he was not very good in training camp in the preseason, and he played better than I expected in the season. Again, do I want him starting? No. But as a swing tackle, it's fine in my book. And Junius mentioned it. Rashawn Slater, Trey Pipkins, Foster Sorrell all went to Duke Manyweather camp this offseason, so maybe that helps. But Zach Bailey, he was a guy on the Chargers practice squad last year. He's back again. They brought back Andrew Traynor as a camp body. Nothing there for me. But Nicholas Millsap's interesting. He was in my honorable mentions list for UDFA. He's 6'7". He was a former tight end. He went to Delta State, a small school kid, kind of still learning the position. But, he showed some really good athleticism, especially when they used him as a pulling tackle, and it got him in space. Obviously, he's a former tight end, so he's pretty athletic for the position. Plays a little high off the edge. Might be better fit inside at guard, but there's some traits here. I think there's some stuff to build on in Millsap. He's definitely not making the 53, but I think will be some good competition for the names in front of him, Bailey and Traynor, who, are just guys, and maybe a practice squad stash possibility there. I felt there were some traits there. I think you could build off that frame and athleticism and maybe, keep him for a year or 2 more and see if you could build off that.
Are we rewriting history with Sorrell a little bit? I feel like
you don't like Sorrell either?
I feel like I remember the San Francisco game and the playoff game, the Jaguars game when he came in and teams were just abusing him. He is the master of the legal false start because he false starts on every single play and doesn't get called for it. I don't know how he gets away with that.
And still gets beat. He got abused on a pretty regular basis, I feel like. Now,
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Can Duke fix that? Maybe. He was a former number 1 overall offensive line prospect coming out of high school. So there are some traits there that teams obviously liked, and maybe they can develop them. But I don't know. I feel like we're rewriting things a little bit.
Garrett. Just
Garrett is rewriting things a little bit.
Don't put me in there.
Yeah. don't lock him. I'm taking a stand here. I didn't think he was god awful, but go ahead.
I mean, he's looking at this group, unless one of the guys listed as an offensive lineman or as a guard outplays him and gets moved back to tackle. Sorrell is probably a lock to make this roster as a swing tackle. Hopefully they carry somebody who can play both guard and tackle, and I'm sure they will, a couple guys for depth. Not much there in Bailey, not much there in Trainer. I honestly haven't watched Millsop, so I'm not going to pretend that I have.
Pull up that Delta State tape, baby.
I think I'll pass. Thank you,
It's
though.
on a camcorder. It was shot on a toaster. It's like blurry and the colors are all weird.
Just hope and pray Slater and Pipkin stay healthy. Did I ever think I'd say hope Pipkin stays healthy? No,
yeah.
I didn't. But he earned his contract. Good for him. He definitely makes the offensive line better when he's on it right now. And hopefully they can develop Sorrell, and then maybe one of these guys sticks as a developmental piece on the practice squad. But I don't think there's a whole lot of depth there. I mean, most teams don't have depth at swing tackle. Right. It's not unique to the Chargers. But I don't think there's reason to be terribly comfortable if Sorrell comes into a game. We'll just put it that way.
I'll tell you what. Here's what I have confidence in. Kellen Moore's ability to make adjustments offensively in the event that if Sorrell has to play extended snaps, you'll probably see more quarterback movement, more getting Herbert outside of the pocket on the move as opposed to 5-7 step drops. The most you could survive with Sorrell comfortably is probably going to be in your quick game. But I would not risk Justin Herbert dropping back 5 to 7 steps with Sorrell in there on a regular basis. So again, if he plays extended snaps, I would expect there to be more of an emphasis on the running game and getting Herbert on the move more. So that's the only thing that makes me feel a little bit better, is having a competent offensive coordinator that can adjust.
I don't know why I have to be the guy defending Foster Sorrell, but I just want to tell
you did it to yourself, man.
Just listen to this. He played 250 snaps last season, 1 total penalty. So not the master of the false start.
I said legal false start.
1 total penalty, only 2 sacks allowed in 250 snaps in 2022.
How many hurries did he sacrifice? Yeah, pressures. How many pressures did he give up?
I don't have that in front of me.
Herbert's a magician.
He only looked up the stats that helped his cause. I did say he got away with the false starts. I didn't say he was getting called for the false starts, but we all noticed it. He was jumping early on every play.
Yeah, but you guys were saying that he was costing penalties and he was costing this team games and stuff. He only allowed 2 sacks.
I saw the dude getting beat
in 250 snaps.
Go back and watch Go back and watch Nick Bosa. Go back and watch Nick Bosa against him and tell me he wasn't getting whooped.
First of all, you're talking about one of the best edge defenders in the NFL. He probably beat Pipkin's ass, if we're being honest. So I'm not saying Foster Sorrell is going to be up to any level that Slater and Pipkins is, but what I'm saying is he is somewhere near the just below average swing tackle in a pinch if you need a starter.
Look, I'll say
I'm not even saying he's average, just below average. And to me, that's okay.
If Duke could fix Pipkins, then maybe there's hope for Sorrell.
Can I also mention, everybody forgot how fucking good Rashawn Slater is. Like, he gets injured 1 year and it's like nobody's mentioning him in anything. Everybody forgot that he was practically a top 5 left tackle in his rookie year. Gets injured and nobody remembers. But here we are. I'm glad he's back and he can show him. Let's finish this up, okay? I'm tired of you guys beating on Foster Sorrell. He didn't deserve this. So interior offensive linemen. Here we go. Zion Johnson, Corey Linsley, Jamari Salyer, the rookie Jordan McFadden, Will Clapp, Brendan Hymas, Isaac Weaver, Austin Pleasance, and the UDFA Johari Branch. So we know the starters. Zion Johnson moving back to left guard. Good move. Veteran Corey Linsley back at center. Hopefully he can stay healthy. Jamari Salyer earned a starting spot after his play at left tackle last season. Switches over to left guard. We know the 5th round pick Jordan McFadden, like Salyer, a former tackle, going to serve as some guard depth early on. I said it when they drafted him. I wouldn't mind seeing him play a little center too if they could, but we'll see if he pitches in camp. We'll see that. Will Clapp re-signed. Why? Your guess is as good as mine, but he's here. Unfortunately, the backup center right now. Brendan Hymas, an interior player who really has just lost favor with the staff, went from a promising potential starter who's going to take over for Matt Filer when he was out to a guy who's probably on the bubble right now. Don't forget, they signed Michael Schofield off the street so they wouldn't have to play Brendan Hymus in an NFL game. So they obviously do not trust Brendan Hymus, but he does have versatility. He did play some tackle in college, obviously, played some guard and center in camp, though he struggled at center in camp. And then after that, Isaac Weaver, former Old Dominion center, probably going to be competing with Will Clapp at the center spot for that backup center spot. Austin Pleasance, guard that played some tackle, bounced around 3 different teams' practice squads in 3 years. And then the UDFA Johari Branch kid, he took the JUCO route, landed at Maryland in 2020, saw him play right guard, center, left guard. So he's got some versatility. Maybe that'll help him with the practice squad spot. But the team kept 9 O-linemen last year. And, you know, we talked about how Rashawn Slater, Trey Pipkins, and most likely Foster Sorrell are your tackles there. Then you move on to Zion, Lindsley, and Salyer as your starters. You've got Will Clapp right now. Jordan McFadden, obviously, is locked in. And then that's 8. If you're looking at a 9th spot, Hymus maybe as your 9th guy. But there's going to, you know, his spot is up for grabs for sure if Weaver and Pleasance could make some noise. But, yeah, those are the guards so far. And happy about Zion moving over to left. Sally, you're coming over at right. And I'm excited to see McFadden in camp because he had some really, really good tape when I got to go back and watch him. I know we were all fans of him after we got to see him.
Yeah, I really love moving Zion from right to left and having him play between Slater and Lindsley. I think that's going to do wonders for his game and just simplify things for him. Because I felt like he kind of got left out on an island at times last year at right guard. So having 2, you know, basically all pro talents surrounding him should help him quite a bit. Salyer is a guy who I always thought was better suited to play guard, especially than left tackle. Really like seeing him earn that spot and playing right guard. Excuse me. McFadden, you mentioned it. I really liked him watching his tape. Fantastic athlete. He's got a mean streak, really strong hands, terrific pass protector, really good in the run game. Not super. He's experienced, played a lot of snaps, needs some work, but a lot to like there. And I could see him playing tackle in a pinch in an NFL game in the next couple of years. I think, you know, you could see him as a possible swing offensive lineman, maybe a swing tackle down the line. Clapp to me is a guy who I know they re-signed him. They signed him for 1 year. I think it was just to give themselves an option, kind of like what they did with Jalen Guyton. I'm not necessarily sure that his spot is guaranteed on the roster. Mm-hmm. At least I hope it isn't. For one, I don't know how much you guys watched of Johari Branch, but I liked him quite a bit. He's a guy who, like Garrett mentioned, kind of took the long way to Maryland, played both guard positions. Then they moved him to center, and the Maryland offense, their passing game in particular, took a huge step forward with him playing center. He was credited with basically holding down the fort for that offensive line when he was playing center. I mean, he's a guy who I think he's a solid athlete, not a great athlete, but a solid athlete. Needs some work on his technique, but he's strong. He can move guys off the line. I think he can be very effective in a power running game. I like him quite a bit. I would not be at all surprised to see him make this team as a 9th offensive lineman. Okay. I think Hymus is on the bubble. I could see Clapp potentially not making it, and I could see Branch leapfrogging one of those guys and grabbing one of the final 2 spots in the offensive line. I just think they're looking ahead for life without Lindsley, and I think having a guy like Branch who knows all 3 interior spots the way he does and has had success playing center, I think you attach him to Corey Lindsley's hip, have him fall around, be a sponge, just soak up whatever he can, and hopefully in a year or 2 he's ready to go.
Yep. So this is the first time I'm going to be on record ever saying anything like this, but I am excited for interior offensive line play this season. And it's because of those first 3 names. And you could tag McFadden on there also. That's going to make for some really interesting tape when reviewing games, because I could see all kind of nastiness going on the interior of offensive line. I can't wait to see them surge off of the offensive line and just knock guys back in the run game. There's going to be a wall. I think they're going to be great in the passing game, but I think where they're really going to shine is in the run game. You've got great athleticism and strength in Zion Johnson. We all know what Corey Linsley is the captain of the front. Jamari Sawyer, just want to see him do what he was meant to do naturally on the inside. He held up more than well, played admirably on the outside last season. And now he's back where he belongs. McFadden is going to be a key piece, because I'm not going to jinx anything, but at the end of the day, just looking at the potential for a guy to have to miss some time, I'm 100% comfortable right now with having to plug McFadden in, whether that's on the inside or having him play a little tackle. And, you know, we don't have to go back to that tackle list, but I'm sure there could be a situation there where if they don't feel comfortable with someone in particular who Garrett loves,
I don't love him.
Garrett's boy, Foster Sorrell.
That's it. There you go. Your turn now. Sorrell's your guy. Stamp it.
Damn it.
So, anyway, Sorrell, in the event that they don't feel overly confident in Sorrell, I think McFadden can do that, or Sawyer's already proven that he can, and kick McFadden onto the inside. Will Clapp, sorry, buddy. We are graduates of the same high school, and I don't care. You're terrible. Jahari Branch, as Jamie mentioned, pretty much took the words out of my mouth. The dude could be the diamond of this group. There's potential there for him to get Will right up off of this roster. Maybe. Clapp's he's a guy. And unfortunately, he's in a situation where, playing center, if you screw up, then everything's gone to hell. And he found himself in situations where offensive plays were blown up just because he was kind of incompetent on the inside. And it sucks to see it, but I do think the Chargers kind of gave themselves a little bit of leash here, bringing him back because he has experience in the offense and is a name that they feel like, I don't know how much we can say they trust him, but they're okay with having him around, and they're just hoping that someone can take that spot from him so he doesn't have to play. As far as Weaver and Pleasance go, I'm not going to lie to you. Didn't watch much of either of them. Hymus was someone that I had pretty high hopes for, and I don't know, just hasn't materialized there. And he had all of the requisite skills to play the position on the inside. I felt like he would be a very decent guard. He measured up pretty well. What's the offensive guard for the Chiefs that they got from
Trey Smith?
From the Patriots? They got him from the Patriots. Who's the offensive guard?
The left guard.
Yeah.
That dude.
I know who you're talking about, but I can't think of his name.
Their measurables and from an athletic standpoint were very similar, and I saw a lot of it on tape from his college games. It looked like he could have a similar type of game, and just it hasn't happened yet. So that's probably another one of those guys who's clinging on and may not make it through to the end of camp, or to the final 53. But maybe there is some potential still there with all of the incoming competition. Maybe it helps him level his game up a bit. But man, just those first four names give me a lot of confidence for an interior of a Chargers offensive line. It's been a really long time since I could say that comfortably.
Joe Tooney.
Tooney. There you go.
Imagine a jumbo package with Jordan McFadden as the third tackle pulling across the line on the goal line, or third and short, or fourth and short. I mean, there's a lot of options there with McFadden and Salyer and Johnson. I agree with Craig. I think that interior group is going to be really good, and I think we could see McFadden on the field this year as an extra offensive lineman, probably provide some special teams depth, and I would have no issues with seeing him play some tackle if needed.
By the way, just a side note, I absolutely love this new, if it's a trend of the slightly undersized tackles from big schools that have the production, but probably won't hang outside in the NFL, that you kick inside to guard like they did with Salyer and how they're doing with McFadden. I love that trajectory of building your offensive line. I love those two picks for sure. But yeah, top 4. I mean, we all 3 of us mentioned it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And can't wait to see Jahari Branch in camp too. So, all right, guys, I think that's going to do it for us today. We're done. Wednesday, we're going to do defense and special teams. We'll cover both of those. And I think
Kicker talk.
Yeah, and Craig will do kicker talk. So,
Damn it.
give me Sorrell. I'll give you punters. All right, so we will see you Wednesday, and appreciate you guys, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Salute.